Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this contract administration practice community session. So, Jim, I'm going to hand it off to you to get started with today's session while I try to push some buttons on the back end. So, Jim, over to you.
Thank you, Matthew. Welcome, everyone, to the call. As you see on the screen, my good friend Doug Freeman hasn't been able to join us yet, and so if he does, he'll ring in and we'll get him involved. A couple of things just to reiterate what Matthew said. Do please ask questions and do please raise your hand and participate. These sessions are way better when you are engaged and involved, and we certainly want you to feel invited to do that. So what this series is based upon is our construction contract administration practice guide put together and put out by CSI. And so we will go walking through the practice guide chapter by chapter, and that's why we introduced it as an introduction to construction contract administration. So I appreciate you being here, and I look forward to our walk through the practice guide. Matthew, let's go ahead and get started with the first slide. So Matthew's helping drive so we can be sure that the slides stay on track and we move through this in an expeditious manner. So what we're going to talk about is the chaos of construction. I think that often it may be like running with the bulls, except maybe the contractor thinks it's running with the architects or engineers, or we may think it's running with the contractors, or they may think, both of us may think it's running with the owner. So I guess we all get a chance to be the bull in the story. And let's take a look at the next slide, and you can see that this is a complex and complicated environment. There are typically a triangle of three, the designer, the architect or engineer, the owner, and the contractor. But there is an assortment of other parties that are brought to the table in the process once construction begins, or even before. So there are consultants, perhaps, to each of us that are the triangle in the middle. The owner sometimes has consultants, as does the contractor, and of course the designers do, and may have a series of consultants and then sub-consultants associated with those, so that there are communication paths through particular parties. There may be indirect communication paths through other parties as we move through construction. And then while we're in construction, fabricators, material suppliers, manufacturers, representatives, the list can get very complex, particularly depending on the size of the projects. So that we are basically in that run with the bulls from the time the notice to proceed is issued on a project to begin. So let's take a look at the next slide and talk about how we can organize this chaos and how we can stay on top of the chaos. Well, how about teamwork? And what can that teamwork do for us? Those of you that might be watching March Madness, wow, what games we are seeing and what opportunities we are watching for teamwork to be successful. Well, what does that do? It gives us better communications, increased productivity on the job site. Project costs are better controlled. Perhaps the projects finish earlier. Certainly there is a momentum and a positive morale on the job site when teamwork is the foundation from which we're working. And my experience has been certainly there are fewer claims and fewer delays on the project. When we put ourselves in a position that we can take that shot at being successful, great things can happen. Well, let's look at the next slide and talk for a second about maybe what are obstacles to that approach. Certainly adversarial relationships on projects that occur. Perhaps they're inaccurate documents. We put ourselves often in a position of, as designers, using up time that unfortunately gets pulled away from the construction phase. Owners may find themselves using that project clock to make decisions that take a bit too long and maybe then create an unreasonable construction schedule. Perhaps there was an unreasonable design schedule to begin with. Particularly those that work in public work, for schools where bond packages or fundraising has to happen, that also can affect the production schedule. Perhaps even create changes that weren't planned during the design phase and also during the construction phase. Where you've worked on projects for private clients, it may get acquired by another organization. And so there are a different set of rules that have to be implemented into the delivery of the project. Depending on where you are in the country, there can be labor disputes, whether you're in an area that uses union work or not. Those kinds of things can delay the project, as well as something that happens with products, either in manufacturing. There have been times in the past where I am based in North Carolina, we go through sheetrock shortages, drywall shortages, for example. So that can be an obstacle to an effective and successful delivery of a project. You can have poor communicators, or poor communication, or poor communication process. These are all obstacles that we can plan and implement ways to work around, or to be sure that they, in fact, don't occur from the beginning. And just overall ineffective management. All three parties involved in the team, whether it's the owner, the contractor, or the designer, can be challenged by ineffective management within their own organizations or between parties. So those are just a list of some of the obstacles. And Matthew, let's go to the next slide and see if there are any questions so far about where we're headed here.
No questions at this point, so feel free to continue.
Okay. Well, let's go to the next slide and talk about ways that that we can work collaboratively to. And as we go along in the chapter of the book here, we break that down into three ideas that can successfully support the collaborative effort on a project. The first, understanding the documents. The second, administering construction based on the particular delivery method that we have on the job. And we're going to just touch on a few of those delivery opportunities. And the third, being the fulfillment of our appropriate roles and what is expected of each of the parties to the contract. We are going to take a look at those briefly as we talk today. And then at our next session, we'll go a little deeper into that third collaborative opportunity in fulfilling our particular roles. So the first, Matthew, the next slide is understanding the documents that we're using. And that's just a cover slide, so let's go to the next one. So as we talk about our contract documents, what do we mean by that? And in beginning that discussion, what are our contracting requirements? Well, we have, of course, the contract forms, the agreements that the designers have executed with the owner, our client, and also the agreements that have been executed between the client and the contractor. If we're talking about a typical design, bid, build, delivery system, those contracts are a little different in design build or construction management at risk, but they are one tier of our contracting requirements. The second is the conditions of the contract, which we'll touch on here a little bit later. Also, any revisions, clarifications, or modifications that have happened either in the bidding process or in the negotiation process, or after contracts have been signed in the construction process, which would be change orders to the contract. So understanding and having a grasp of those contracting requirements, that part of the contract documents is particularly critical in a beginning and a starting point. Then would follow our specifications, the written requirements for the work that is going to be performed. And those are, of course, broken down into each work result. For example, the roof, the windows, etc., that are involved with the project. So those specifications, understanding them from start to finish, from top to bottom, is a really important part for all of the team involved with the construction. And then the contract drawings themselves. The drawings, not just the plans, to include all of the schedules, etc. They're included in a set of documents, whether those are large graphic illustrations or just schedule details. So in looking at the contract documents and thinking about where you start in the construction process, this is a group discussion about the construction phase and our administration of the construction phase. But I'll just take a second and say one really important opportunity for all of us is to become engaged in the projects during their development and during the drawing phase of the project. It's not something that has to wait until construction begins. Many firms have the opportunity for peer review, for quality control or quality assurance procedures where our expertise from the field can be brought into the office and inform some of the decisions made in the design process itself. So I always want to remind everyone that this doesn't just start when the starter's pistol goes off in the construction phase, but is something that goes all the way back to the marketing and sales of the job, so that we can have input into those contracting requirements from the very beginning. So let's take a look at the next slide, and I'll add, we are very fortunate to have so many professional organizations in the field that we practice, whether it's construction, design, or even for the owners that own facilities, that develop facilities, whether it's and there should be more noted on this slide that I have left off, and I apologize for that. The AGC, Consensus Docs, CMAA, the EJCDC, PENC, or ACEC, or DBIA, these organizations that have put together a foundation for us to start from. When we begin to pull together our construction documents, our contracts, our agreements, there are long-standing, tested, litigated, annually or semi-annually or on some schedule revised and updated documents that all of these organizations support or pour their effort into to keep us from having to start from scratch. It applies to so many things in our business. Why would we start with a blank page when we are able to start from a point of such an informed past and move forward from there? So as we pull those contract documents together, the first thing I just wanted to harp on here, if you will, is using those professional organizations that represent our practice and our construction, and begin with that learned history moving forward. So, Matthew, I'll pause there as we go to the next slide and see if there are any comments or any questions about contract documents and contracts.
I haven't anything yet. There was one question that came in that I'm holding for later on, as I think it relates to a different slide. But other than that,
okay.
People have been pretty quiet.
Okay. Well, I will say this too, and I share this with the construction administration class that I have. I think it's really important to reach out and befriend many individuals as you build your practice and as you build your career in the construction administration field. And one of those is having a dear friend that's in the practice of law, because there's so many opportunities to discuss and talk about the finer points of what things mean before you're having to do that under pressure or in response to some filing or litigation. And I encourage you to befriend those in the practice of law to seek advice and as you move into your practices and through your practices. So the delivery of the project also involves the drawings. And offhandedly, we quickly think about the rolled up blueprints out on the site in the trailer or in the building. And actually the drawings are made up of several different opportunities or components. There are resource drawings, where these may be involved with the project in the early phases, or they may be a part of your documents as you deliver them for bid or for construction. But these resource drawings usually show existing conditions, where that might be a renovation or an addition. You, of course, have the contract drawings that are named in your agreements, and those are used to establish the extent of the work. Doug, who is typically on these calls with us, enjoys saying that the contract drawings are documents that are intended, that are used to show the intent of the design, and they are not a step-by-step set of instructions on how to build a building. And so they establish the extent of the work or the intent of the extent of the work. There are also shop drawings that are a part of the drawings that are typically prepared by those who will be more closely involved with the work, either manufacturers or suppliers or the subs that are putting up work. But there's an important distinction in those shop drawings, and that is that they are not contract documents. They're supplemental information. They're important. They need to pass through your office under a critical eye, but they are not a part of the contract documents. They're coordination drawings. In North Carolina, those are required on state-owned property and are one of the most difficult things to obtain. They're information that's provided by the subcontractors, and they determine relationship of project elements and who goes first and who goes second. They are invaluable if they are done properly, if they are done on time, ahead of work, and actually it can be an extremely useful tool for the construction community as well as us as we're walking around the job trying to observe progress of work, and they can be very informative. They may have record drawings that are intended to capture any kind of modifications or changes that occurred in the field during the installation and construction, and are critical to our clients, our owners, as they move into the facility management phase of the work and their occupancy of their property. And then there are now more and more often 3D representations, electronic models of how a project goes together, which take it from having to visualize to actually being able to see it. And I'm sure that many of you are on job sites, particularly larger projects, where this is actually up on a screen out on the job site, and conversations are happening around that screen about conflict avoidance and ways that two things aren't in the same spot at the same time. So these are a continued conversation. Matthew, let's go to the next slide of other resources and support that we use for the drawings and for the contract documents. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, I was going to say, before we go there, we have a couple of comments and questions here. Question from Brian McClure asking, just, are coordination drawings a lost art form at this point?
Well, that's a great question, and I would sadly say I think they are, in my experience and the work that I've done, and it's sad. They're typically in the state of North Carolina. There's extensive explanation of what they are and the expectations of receiving them and who's to do them and how they're to be produced, and I believe you're absolutely right. It's a lost art. We seem to get them almost at the same time we get the record drawings anymore.
Additional comments here. One of them here from Dean. He just wants to remind everybody, as he talks about construction management is not the same as contract administration, and he has several of his students tend to confuse these two. We have a comment or a question in here from Donald. Donald's asking, can you address lead time as a factor in the construction schedule and setting a realistic construction schedule? I'm not sure if you want to talk about that here as it relates to drawings, or if that's something you want to talk about as we get into the roles slides later on.
Well, let's talk about it in the roles.
Okay.
That's a great idea. Don't let us miss that, Matthew,
Okay.
because that's a great question.
Alrighty. Just wanted some additional clarification here from Frank, who is asking, what category do construction drawings fall under?
What category to do the contract drawings?
The construction drawings. So I'm guessing within the 6 we have up here.
Yes, contract or construction drawings is what I would say in that second item.
Okay. And then we had a comment came in here from Bradley saying, thank you for bringing up contract administration benefits for projects by starting early. I've been working on the owner-operator side in hospitality, where early CCA implication has benefited projects greatly for all the reasons discussed by you. Thank you for bringing up the benefits for projects with... Looks like the comment just actually just repeated itself twice here for some reason. So keep up the good work, it sounds like there. And Charles brings in a question here of coordination drawings are now part of modeling, if that's correct.
Well, I think that they, as earlier was stated that maybe they're a lost art, I think that they are... what's a good word to say, that they're being enveloped in the building modeling process, because we are seeing more and more detail and able to be rendered at such a exploded view and opportunity. They are, I think, being assimilated, if you will, into the modeling systems. And if you're fortunate enough to have that ability in your firm, and your client, your owner, understands that the value of that tool, I'll go so far as to say, integrated project delivery is certainly maybe even more advantageous than the coordination drawings by themselves. So if you've got a team that's sophisticated enough to be using the modeling from design through construction and into facility management, gosh, I think that's the best of all worlds, maybe.
Okay, well, that clears up all the questions we have for now, so I'm going to move on, and you can keep going, Jim.
Okay, so just as an example, again, I want to reiterate there are so many resources for us to have for support in what we do in the design and construction industry. One of the most important things I think you can do is become knowledgeable of these resources and support that's out there and use them. I love to call myself a weird architect because I'm into this stuff, if you will, and I feel like it makes me a better resource to my client when I'm able to start from a point that has been tested before. That is not to say that it takes away from unique design. I just think it makes that unique design be informed. So let's go to the next slide, Matthew, and talk about a resource that CSI provides, which is the Construction Specifications Practice Guide. So the specifications are another of our contract documents that give a written description of what's supposed to be performed in the field. It's broken down into a very easy, followable format in master format, divided into procurement processes, then general requirement processes, and then to follow with actually what is going to be put in place out in the field with the work divisions themselves. I enjoy the opportunity that I've had recently to get in front of students and talk about this Division I general requirements. Those of you that have had interns or young people in your offices or who have taught or do teach, and on the construction side where you have interns that are in the field with you, the lack of general understanding of what kind of general requirements are out there to have to be understood and be implemented in the process of construction can be pretty overwhelming. I certainly didn't know anything about the written part, the paperwork part, the tremendous amount of work that is beyond just drawing or specifying a product. And so this is an incredibly wonderful resource in this practice guide to help people who are starting out in construction administration, not necessarily to be specification writers, although it would certainly inform that, but to be able to understand the implementation of those specifications in the construction process. So, where we have our specifications divided in those work sections, first there's additional administrative information, but then there's also product-specific information. Great place to learn about the products that you're thinking about using. And then in that third part, gosh, it's just such a great tool to help us learn to understand what's being built, how it's being built, how it should be being built, so that when you're on your site doing your observation and somebody says, well, this is the way I've always done it, having this tool and this contract document, the specifications, to look back on and say, well, gosh, I appreciate that, but here's the way we need to do it on this job, because this is what the product manufacturer says we need to do with whatever system it is that you're looking at. So again, resources that are available to us that can make our life so much easier and make that team so much stronger. And then, Matthew, the next slide is the final piece of the contract documents that are revisions, any kind of clarifications or modifications. Again, depending on the delivery method, there are addenda that even in the design bid build market are issued prior to bids being received. so that pre-contract things can be clarified and changed, and they become a part of the contract documents. Sometimes there are modifications to a bid that may be inconsequential or clerical in nature that have to be made, and those would certainly roll into the contract documents if they are something that occurs on a project. And then finally, after contracts are executed and the work begins, either change orders or change directives, field orders, and those kinds of modifications that occur after the start of construction become a part of the contract documents. So that is a really fast conversation and review of opportunities for being collaborative in understanding our documents. I want to move to the second part now in the next slide and talk about how that administering may change a bit depending on the delivery method. Matthew, before we do, are there any new questions?
There was just one that popped up. Oh, I guess there's a couple here now. From Bradley, just came in and says, are mock-ups ever part of the contract?
Well, it has not been my experience that they have ever been a part of the contract, but I will say I do know instances where mock-ups were constructed prior to the contracts being signed and were referenced in the contract documents that the end result of XYZ will match, and it denoted the mock-up, included dimensions and photographs, and that dealt more with exterior skins and appearance kind of issues, not necessarily the hard structural support and construction itself. I haven't had that experience, but I do know that there is an opportunity to do that. Now, mock-ups are very much a part of your construction administration process if they're done after the award of the contract and are used as a measure against what you will measure the project. So when you have a mock-up done for brickwork and windows and flashing and waterproofing, it is in your general requirements defined that it is a part of the expectation or a part of the quality control on the project. I am familiar with projects that use an expanded supplementary general conditions that begin with the general conditions in master format and expand that to be very specific about tying the mock-up to the expected end result in the project. So it can be very much a contracted expectation if it's delineated properly in the specifications.
We have a couple of additional comments, Jim, that have come in regarding this. One of them came in from Dean saying they've been required to furnish mock-ups in the contract for construction to verify constructability in the fenestration, as well as Bradley has commented that specifically they've been with to denote a mock-up in the contract. They've been used for interior mock-ups to communicate execution quality to the trades. So those are two examples that might be something people have done there. We did have one request to go back for a second to the other slide, so I'm going to do that here momentarily so that, Shay, if you had any questions about that or if there was something else you needed to write down, feel free to do so. While that's up, we did have a note here from Dean saying agenda may be issued on a different timeline depending on use of AIA or EJCDC, which also include intent to award notice. So an additional note to some of the conversation we had just had.
Right.
And then Shay, I hope that's been enough time. You can let me know if you need to see it again, or I can give you some information afterwards. But I guess I'll advance the slides forward here, and we can go to the next section.
Right. So, again, staying on this track of teamwork and opportunity to be successful, obviously our involvement in the construction administration phase varies greatly depending on the delivery method of the work. The majority of the experience that I personally have had, and that of Doug Freeman, my cohort with these webinars, is in the design, bid, build market, where there is a single prime contractor. It's the most common method that is used within our state anyway, and projects are awarded on the lowest price. And in this model, our involvement as designers is that we are responsible for the construction administration, so that we administer the construction contract for the owner during the period of construction. Because budgets are what they are around the country and times are difficult, we in North Carolina have started to expand our horizons as far as public-owned projects and the delivery method. Another is design, negotiate, build, where we have created an invited list, possibly, for single prime contractors to bid. These may be used more often in specific types of work where experience is much more important, maybe in the correctional field or in some health, particularly mental health fields. There are state-owned properties. And sometimes these come as a cost of the work plus a fee, where there is a guaranteed maximum price. So again, we as the designer are responsible for the construction administration for our clients. In the construction management delivery method, there are variations in that delivery, whether it's construction management at risk, and typically the construction manager is a contractor, or whether it's construction management as an advisor, where the construction manager may divide the project out into different packages and manage the bidding of those packages for the owner. So there's a delivery method where it's the CM at risk or where the CM is an advisor. Typically, the designer designs, and management, we may be involved more in, we may be involved somewhat in the construction administration of the project, but typically that responsibility of construction administration really is construction management and is done by the construction manager as the advisor, and they undertake many of those responsibilities. I'm so glad that someone pointed out earlier the difference in construction administration and construction management. They get used interchangeably, and they are not at all the same. And many people in our profession struggle with that difference. Construction management is much more a general construction, project management, at-risk, building phase involvement, where construction administration is very much a administering of documents. I hesitate to call it a more paper version, a less hands-on version, but I think that that's a rudimentary explanation of how that's different. You know, we're observing where a construction manager is very engaged in contracting and shopping for materials and labor and implementing with that team what is eventually taken under contract. So, Matthew, let's go to the next slide, and I'll keep going through the various delivery methods. It's just one more slide, and then we can take questions about this portion. So North Carolina also is very interested in design build now as another delivery method because there's an opportunity here for one-stop shopping by the owner. Often the designers work, designers work as a contractor to the general contractor. So we're employed by the contractor to produce a project for the owner. Cost and time control are a must in scenarios where design build is used. And typically the general contractor performs the construction administration. So these are methods where there's a history or a trust between the client and the contractor, or between the whole team, where in fact you three have worked together, or we three have worked together before. So there are opportunities where the owner may actually do some of the construction administration in a design build delivery method as well. We haven't seen much of this in North Carolina, but there's an owner build method, obviously, where the owner provides their own management services and oversees perhaps a designer performing CA, but our role in that kind of delivery method might be greatly reduced. But there's a layer of management that many owners feel like is eliminated there. And this is more often the case with very sophisticated owners who have a lot of experience with the construction phase. And then an integrated project delivery method where team members are engaged early in the design process before construction is ever undertaken. And many of the activities in the typical project phase are moved earlier in the process, so that there's an opportunity for less coordination problems, for less changes that are contemplated later. Our role in construction administration can be greatly simplified because a lot of the things that we may typically find in the construction phase are being resolved much earlier. And I'll add one here as I asked Matthew if there are any questions. One of the things that is changed in North Carolina is we have a public-private partnership opportunity now as another delivery method where private money and funding and perhaps even land are constructed and leased by a public entity where that public entity involves occupancy of a facility for a long-term period of time. Again, because of budget shortages and different organizations, this is a delivery method that's based on the need for money to be able to do what they need to do. So, Matthew, are there any questions now, or shall we go to our roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, there was just the one comment came in here from Donald. CA is compliance with CDs oriented. So that's just, I guess, another way of looking at it from his point of view here. But I'll move to the next slide.
Sure. Sure. So this is just a slide, and we can go to the next one and the next one after that. But big and small, we have to do it all. And we have roles that we are supposed to fulfill, as well as the other partners in this endeavor with us. So I'll talk for a second about ours first as designers, engineers, and architects. We certainly are there to represent the owner, but in doing so, we're expected to be fair and impartial as we represent the owner, which causes many confusion. But if you stick by the adage that honesty is the best policy, that's another way to look at it. But we are a representative of the owner, there to observe the project and endeavor to keep them from experiencing unacceptable or non-conformant or non-compliant construction. We certify and we recommend, and many of us don't like that word certify, but it is a part of what we do. In North Carolina, we certify, as Dean pointed out in some of the other documents, EJCDC and some of the others. We make recommendations rather than certifications, and those are related to payment applications for amount of work in place, or that the project is actually complete and in accordance with the contract documents, which we interpret throughout the project. Remember, it's not a set of directions on how to build, it's a delivery of intent. And so we have to sometimes interpret what it was that we were trying to share as a thought or an idea in the construction documents. I don't personally like that myself. I think that to be fair to the construction community and to be professional with our owners, we ought to be able to show what we intended. If we can't do it in drawings, we ought to do it in words, and it ought to be biddable and buildable. But that's just my little soapbox. One of our roles is to review and decide on claims, and that goes back to being on the fence and being impartial. We've got to process the modifications, whether those are change orders or additional information that the contractors need in order to do the project properly. We review submittals and we do inspections. Again, a word that we don't like, but it's what we do. You can call it observe, that's fine, but if it moves to litigation, we all almost always become inspectors. We don't like it and we fight it, but sometimes that's just the way it ends up. In our role, we have limitations of authority and responsibilities, and we've got documents within all these organizations that I've talked about that help us understand what those are, as well as our other responsibilities and duties. So those are just a smattering of the designer's roles. Matthew, let's take a look at the contractors.
All right, just wanted to one question here to verify. Is certify, as listed on here, essentially the same as approve? Well,
it is, and certify has a legal definition, and it's a strong term. But yes, approve, you can use that word. When it comes to a pay application in North Carolina, you are certifying. You are promising that what the owner is paying for is actually there and in place and in conformance with the contract documents. So help you good gracious. So it's a very definite and very serious word, certify.
And then we have, I was just going to say, we also have additional comment came in here from Chuck. He wants to clarify, architects do 2 inspections, one at substantial completion and one at acceptance. All others are observations.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We inspect twice. Well, we're supposed to. You're exactly right.
All right, so we will move on to the contractor's role, and I'll take this time to remind you about the question we had earlier about the construction schedule and setting a realistic construction schedule.
Yes. So when we get to schedule, let's talk about that. So the contractor has 2 pages here in slides of the responsibilities, and I'm keeping an eye on the clock so that we're sure we wrap up here on time. So I apologize for going through these so quickly, but of course it's their job to review the contract documents and field conditions and understand how to deliver the project in accordance with those documents, and comply with those documents. And the way that they're doing that is supervising and directing the work, being sure that the necessary labor and materials are there to perform the work, and that they are the right materials for compliance with our specifications. They're able to be warranted, they're new, they're not used, they're free from defects, and when they're in place, they're paid for, taxes are paid. Before work started, permits, fees, anything that's required by the contractor are paid. Sometimes the owner will pay some of those, but typically they fall to the contractor. And they're required to, if we have allowances in the job, pots of money to charge things against, like fixing unsuitable soil, that they keep those in proper order and accounted for so that they can be reconciled at the end of the job, and that they monitor construction progress. So let's go to the next slide and talk about that construction schedule. So they're maintaining record drawings at the job, and they're being sure that they are expeditious in the scheduling and implementation of the work. One of the things that has always been curious to me, we use a lot of time in the schedule for design, and often the owner will change their mind, maybe once, maybe twice, maybe 25 times. But they keep the completion date the same. And I think if you have the appropriate team together and you've done the appropriate work to create a trust and a teamwork framework collaborative effort, then you're able to say, and it's not an easy conversation, we've got to move this completion date. Particularly not easy if it's a school and they were going to finish right in time to open. Particularly not easy if it's a retail organization that wants to hit a shopping season, or they're just interested in having cash to begin to roll into the firm or to the business. But remember, we're on the fence and we're supposed to be impartial. Speaking up for the contractor, I think, is really important, especially early. So in my experience, if for example, you're able to sit down, and this is getting to the answer to the question to me, before you start the clock, bring the contractor and your client together and say, let's talk about some reasonable times for you to buy this job out. We understand what that means now. You've got to go sign contracts with some 300 subcontractors or 50 subcontractors. That's going to take a minute. You've got to get some documents back in your hands to get to us. That's going to take some time. Steel drawings are not something that can be done overnight. We understand you need some time to do that. Let me ask you, can you give us a reasonable time to start the clock that gives you some legwork time to get those things pulled together? So maybe we start the clock 30 days from now. Would that be advantageous to what you have to do now in the front end of this project? And let's then set a reasonable schedule so that you can move forward and so you've got every opportunity to be successful. I've had that be this aha moment many, many times with clients, and they get that. They understand that if you involve them in the conversation. And I guess one other thing about the schedule is if you have a client that's got an unreasonable schedule, you're professional enough to understand that. If that client isn't willing to submit to some alteration of that, then you may be pre-informed of some issues you're going to have and be prepared for that. You can talk to your contractor friends and understand what's a reasonable period of time for a schedule. Try to use that when you put your project documents together. So I'll quickly say on this slide, cleaning, patching, paying for, and indemnifying us and the owner, and proceeding with forces that can get the work done on time. Matthew, let's go to the next slide. It ended up being 3. I see now. So submitting those schedules and making payments as you're supposed to, and completing the job when you're finished, so that we do our 2 inspections in the end of the project where it's substantially complete and finally complete. And paying for everything and turning that over lock, stock, and barrel with no liabilities or encumbrances to the owner, with all the tests and inspections from the authorities having jurisdiction in place and completed. That's all the contractor has to do. Now, that's a joke. That's a mouthful. And I think, and again, going back to the teamwork and collaborative effort, us designers, us owners ought to have a full understanding and appreciation of what the contractor has to undertake in the way projects are delivered today. And so I think them understanding their role, us producing documents that help them understand that role clearly, and our clients understanding what their role is an opportunity to be really successful. So let's look at the owner's role, and then Matthew, I'll stop and see if there are any questions about the contractors. And I'm sorry to go through that so fast.
And then, Jim, did you want to take the questions now or wait till the end?
Well, I'll just go through because there's only 2 more slides.
Okay, because we have a collection of ones from the contractor, but also I had 2 for the owner that I've been holding off on. So I'll let you go, and then I'll jump in at the end. Okay.
I don't have anything to do until 3 o'clock today, so I'll stay here as long as y'all want to. So in the owner's role, first of all, their obligation is for information and any services that might be important, and it's accurate information that we need. Do you own the property? Have you got the ability to pay me? Is the site information solid? And get this to me as soon as you can. I want to know that you're insured like you should be, and give me my documents, and then we can go to work. So there are some assurances that are an important part of the owner's role early in the project. And if there are fees or if there are approvals that needed to be obtained before construction started, whether they were easements or whether assessments were paid, these are things that the owner needs to have taken care of clearly before the work begins. And then the last slide are some of the other roles, or the next slide, or some of the other roles that the owner plays, and several rights that they have. So Matthew, you can go to the next one. They have the right, and they are the only ones that have the right to stop the work. They can carry out the work, perform work, either themselves or through separate contracts. If the project's not being kept clean, they have the right to do that. They also can occupy portions of the work if they need to do so in order to advance their opportunities, and can partially occupy and use the project. They also have the right to terminate a contractor for due cause if it comes to that. And lastly, they're certainly responsible for making timely payments to the contractor to move the project forward. A paid contractor on time is a happy contractor, and so are her subcontractors. It's an important part of the owner's role. So that's the conclusion of the responsibilities and roles. As I said, next month we will go deeper into those roles, and that was a quick overview. So Matthew, I'll try to take on the questions.
Great. All right. So while we're on the owners, I'll do those questions. We had an owner question that came in at the beginning from Donald, and I've been holding it. And actually, it was also asked again. By Nikonye. And the question is essentially reference to the owner's representative. And they weren't listed on that initial diagram that we had at the beginning of the presentation for the different team structure. And I was wondering what their role adds to the overall team dynamic. And essentially, what do you think the owner's rep part is within the AEC industry?
Well, I apologize for not being more clear and in the diagram those bubbles that said consultant, and I will fix that before we ever do this again, were intended to represent the owner's rep. I think more often when there's an owner's representative, it's typically with a larger owner who has facilities personnel, and they are the person in responsible charge who communicates back and forth with the client. That's been most of my experience. Although there are some larger organizations that have a consultant who is an owner's rep, and that's why it said consultant. But, I think their role in the way I would define it is as the owner. My experience has been they've been given the authority to make decisions. Perhaps they go back when it's money, but and particularly if it's large amounts of money that are changing in the contract. But my experience is that they are in a direct line between the owner and the architect, which is the way the information should flow to the contractor. What I find is that they often have a direct line to the contractor, and if that communication is, for example, at your owner's architect's contractor's meeting and it's out in the open, certainly that sharing of information can work well. I don't know if that answers the question, so if I didn't, please ask again.
All right. Going through a couple of the other questions we had here then. So kind of going back, there was a comment here from Dean just saying one thing he's learned the hard way, review submittals from subs and sub-subs and suppliers before sending them on. So this was a kind of a horror story there, I think, is probably in the works at some point there. We had a question here from Bradley. Does it ever make sense?
Matthew, let me interrupt you for a second.
Sure.
So, Dean, when we get to the submittals chapter, I hope you'll be on that call and share that horror story with us. That'll be a chapter. I'm not sure what it is, but go ahead, Matthew.
Great. We also had questions came in here. So Bradley has, does it ever make sense to include a contract time allowance for change orders?
That's an interesting question. I have seen allowances for general conditions. So if this contract is extended by X amount of time, and typically it's a month. If this is a monthly general conditions charge, if we have to stay here another 30 days, it's going to cost you $10,000 or $3,000 a day or whatever the number might be. I've never seen actually the time itself, but that's an interesting thought. I have seen it, though, just be listed as the overhead and general conditions cost for an extension.
All right. Dean just commented, he said, will do, so he'll be happy to share his thing, and that's going to be Unit 6, so we'll see him then. Going back to additional questions here, from Michael, we have, can a contractor not provide a subcontractor list until he is under contract? Does not the owner have the right to review the subcontractor list before signing the initial contract?
That's a great question, and in North Carolina, I apologize for continuing to say that. I want to be sure you know where my experience is from, and it may be totally different in other states. In North Carolina, if you want to know as a architect or engineer who subcontractors are, you can ask for those specifically to be listed. But you have to do that. You have to show in the bid form, and you have to call out, electrical, mechanical, site. You can go as deep into that as you want to request those subcontractors. And then include the verbiage that you reserve the right to reject their bid. That gets difficult because if they've got the lowest price and they are a licensed and insured and bonded contractor, not accepting that bid can be very messy. But you are able to require them to provide you that information. And if you put it in the bid documents that you reserve the right to kick that bid out, then you can do that. What I've also seen more often is that there will be an add deduct alternate listed in the bid documents. Let's use controls systems for HVAC work. So if I'm an owner that has a chain, I want X company in my buildings because all the rest of them have it. So you bid your job the way you're going to bid it, and then I've got an alternate to get X. So if I tell you I want X, this is what it would cost me. And the contractor has the opportunity to add money to the bid as an add in that alternate, or a zero, or a deduct. I see it go many ways, so that they are able to, some use that add alternate process to try to get to be the lowest bidder because they know the owner wants it if it's listed there.
All right, we have 4 more questions here. Can you address the lead time as a factor in the construction schedule and setting a realistic construction schedule?
Well, that's what I meant by getting them involved early, having the contractor be at the table to talk about a start date, using your contractor friends to give you some idea of what kind of time frame is reasonable for a particular project type. So I don't know if that question is about something different there, or maybe I already answered that one.
All right, perfect. And then we have, does the contractor have to turn over partially completed portions of the work before the owner can occupy it to advance the owner's schedule?
I've never had a client take over a partially completed portion of the work. Perhaps maybe storage of materials. The owner had to order and have a delivery on something that was done far earlier. Progress was impeded, and so they took delivery of the item, and the contractor allowed them to store it on the site. I haven't had that kind of experience where the owner sort of forcefully took over a portion of the work that wasn't completed. They pushed hard to get it completed so they could take it over, but not too early.
All right, and we're wrapping up here. Is it better for the owner to hire the testing company?
Well, I love that question. Yes, it is. In North Carolina, that's the requirement. The owner hires and pays for the testing agencies, but there are obligations on the contractor's part. Should they, for example, fail tests, then they pay for the retesting, or improperly schedule a testing company to be on the site, then they have to pay for those visits that resulted in a lack of canceling an appointment. So, but because the owner is paying for that service, the results are held at arm's length, and in North Carolina, the belief is that they are more trusted results because that party works for the owner.
Great. And then the last question we have here at the moment, now that we're quite a bit over time, how do you integrate labor contracts that affect work stoppage issues? Do the labor contracts trump owners' rights to some degree?
I have no earthly idea. I am sorry. I don't know. I guess that would be, I wish Doug was on the line. He could probably answer that. Doug is an architect and an attorney. I'm not sure. I don't know what would trump there. I have to believe that if it's a single prime contract and the general contractor is obligated to deliver the project, that would take precedent over a downline contract between that contractor and his sub. I'm sure the owner would be at the table and be pulled into it, but gosh, I don't know for sure. I'm sorry.
All right. Well, it's always good when we can stump the speaker.
There you go. That's not hard. That's not hard with me.
We did have a comment that just came in here at the end is related to that question. A horror story of the owner forcing the GC to hire the testing company, and the GC hid work and their schedules from the testing guys. Always some entertaining shenanigans going on in the construction industry. But with that, we are going to wrap up today. Thank you again, Jim, for staying after the hour. We look forward to seeing you there, and remember to keep bringing your questions so that we can see if we can stump Jim again next time.
Right on. Thank you, everybody, for sticking out the extra time. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for being here.